So hello everyone, my name is Colm O'Brien and I am an Irish speaker from Clondalkin in Dublin, and I'm going to be talking about some of the common myths and negative beliefs that we often hear about the Irish language. So things like Irish is a dead language, or Irish has lots of made up words, we'd be poor if we spoke Irish, Irish medium schools are middle class, Republicans have hijacked the language, or Irish names are crazy. So I'm going to start by talking about the most basic question about the Irish language. Is it alive? So according to a survey by Eorpach Research, there are about 160,000 fluent Irish speakers in Ireland. Now that may not seem like a lot, but the linguistic project Ethnologue estimates that half of the world's languages have less than 8,000 speakers. So that means that Irish actually has more fluent speakers than the majority of the world's languages. Now, there have been many complaints about the official status of the Irish language in the European Union, but not many people know that more Irish is spoken in the European Parliament than Maltese or Estonian, and in some years, more than Latvian and Danish, which has 5 million speakers. Now, people will also say that Irish is kind of comical or embarrassing in some way because it has words in it that came from other languages. So words like these: car, taxi, lawn, a bus, and the last one here, rugby. This was mentioned in an article in a newspaper criticising the language a few years ago. So I decided, well, how do other languages translate the word rugby? So what I found is that most languages don't translate the word at all. They just use the English spelling R-U-G-B-Y, while some of them do change the spelling, just like Irish does. So that's just one example of how one word moves from one language to another, something that happens all the time with nearly all languages, none more so than English itself. Now, it's said that Ireland would be poorer if we spoke Irish, because English is the international language of business and trade. Most of the world's richest countries aren't actually English speaking. Now, for centuries there was a belief that the Irish language was linked to poverty. But in recent decades, the exact opposite belief has developed, that there's a link between Irish and elitism through the claim that Gaeilge are middle class. But if you look at where Gaeilge are located in Dublin, for example, you'll see that almost half of them are in working class areas. So places like Ballymun, Tallaght, Clondalkin, Finglas and the North Inner City. And there are many Irish language schools that have the disadvantaged deaf status. There's 3 in Cork, 8 in Dublin, and others in Limerick and elsewhere. Now, a claim that's made in Northern Ireland is that Republicans have hijacked the language. So things like this image here, showing the Irish flag, machine guns, and the Republican motto, Chucky our law. So in response to this, I show this image. This is the flag of the British Army's Royal Irish Regiment, and they also have an Irish language motto, which is Fága Ballach, which means cleared away. And there are other people and organisations from a British background that also use the Irish language. For example, Queen Elizabeth II, or the British Council. Now, there's another belief about Irish, that Ireland would be more conservative if we spoke Irish, that there's a link somehow between the Irish language and Catholicism and sexual repression. So I have a tweet here which perfectly summarises this view. It says, for my generation, 40 plus, the language is forever tied up with the Roman Catholic Church, Fianna Fáil, GAA, PEG, Misery, and cruddy old Ireland, Yeuch. So in response to this belief, I show this photo here. So this is a mountain near Leenane in Galway called the Devil's Mother. And the original Irish name for this mountain is Moggerly an Down. Now that doesn't actually mean the Devil's Mother, it means the demon's testicles. And there are other place names in Ireland that have sexual organs in their titles, believe it or not. So there's a place in Donegal called Bud an Down, which means the demon's penis. And there's a place in Antrim called Ballypitmave, which means the townland of May's vagina. And it's not just place names. There are also names like these found in the natural world. So, for example, the bird on the left there is the kestrel, known in Irish as bud guithe or wind penis. And the fish at the bottom there is a cod, also known in Irish as bud rua or red penis. Now, the interesting thing about these is that I find it hard to say words like penis and vagina in public. It's kind of awkward and embarrassing. And that's because these are taboo words in English, but they're not taboo words in Irish. So you can say Moggerly and Joan, but you can't say the demon's testicles. So that's why the name got translated to the devil's mother. So what it shows is that Irish is actually more sexually liberated than English. And I think that answers the claim that we'd be more repressed if we spoke Irish. Now, the newest negative belief to emerge about the Irish language is that Irish names like Cueva, Niamh, and Oisin are crazy and that they're not pronounced the way they're spelled. So an example is this video that BuzzFeed did of Americans trying to pronounce Irish names, which has over 4 million views. Now, I'm going to show you the photo here. This is the hip-hop artist and producer Puff Daddy, or P. Diddy. And the reason I've shown you his photo is because he has an Irish language name. His real name is Sean. And I have another well-known singer here, Liam Gallagher. He also has an Irish language name. So that just shows that people around the world can learn how to pronounce Irish language names even if they don't comply with English phonetics. So I'm going to show you another Irish name here. So if you weren't familiar with this name, you might think it's pronounced Aontas or something like that. And if I were to explain that that's pronounced A, people might be amazed. They might think A-O-D-H, how can that be pronounced A? That's insane, right? But if you look at the next slide here, you can see the English for A. Now, we're all familiar with the name Hugh and how it's pronounced. And we've probably never asked or even noticed, well, why does it have a GH at the end of it? And why isn't it pronounced Hugha or something like that? So the thing is, because we're familiar with Hugh, we think its spelling is normal. But if we're not familiar with A, we think its spelling is strange and unusual. And Hugh isn't the only example. So if we were to use the same logic that we use with Irish names with some of these English names here, we wouldn't say, for example, John and Stephen. We'd say Jahan and Stephen. So what this all shows is that there's nothing unusual about Irish language names. Now, the most commonly debated subject about the Irish language is its status in the education system. So people will say they don't like the Irish language because it's compulsory in school, it has no practical use, the teaching methods focus on grammar and rote learning, and in previous generations, the language was beaten into children in school. Now, what's interesting about these complaints is that all of them could be applied to other parts of the curriculum. The compulsory nature, the usefulness, the teaching methods, and the corporal punishment, but for whatever reason, they aren't. Now, another thing that's often mentioned in the debate about Irish in the education system is the book Peg, which was on the Irish curriculum up to about 20 years ago. And it's said that Peg is a depressing, end-to-end story of misery and hardship that has put generations of Irish people off the Irish language. So I decided to read Peg recently just to see what all the fuss is about. So while Peg has lots of sad and tragic stories in the book, to say that it is just misery from start to finish is not accurate at all. There's actually lots of interesting and even funny stories in it. So I'd say the one where Peg hits a male chauvinist in the head with a rotten turnip is probably my favourite story. But why is Peg so ubiquitous in the debate about the Irish language? So my theory is that Peg is actually a metaphor or a personification of an older negative belief about the Irish language, because she's old, she's rural, she's poor, and she's apparently depressing. So according to my history book in school, it was a fact of life for the people of Ireland as the 19th century progressed that Gaelic was the badge of poverty and failure. And one example from the period itself is this quote from Thomas Davis in 1845, who said, At present, the middle classes think it a sign of vulgarity to speak Irish. So the question then is, when did Irish stop being a badge of poverty or a sign of vulgarity? Or did it stop at all for some people? Now, it's important to bear in mind that Irish wasn't always considered a badge of poverty. So here are pictures of some Irish-speaking nobles who lived in the 16th and 17th centuries. Now, it may be hard for us to imagine an Ireland in which the super rich, the wealthy elite, speak the Irish language. So I did an artist's impression of this just to give you an idea of what it might look like. So here we have a photo of A. O'Neill with a Bentley and a private jet, just to give you an idea of what that might look like. So finally, I'm just going to talk about another thing that's often said about the Irish language, which is that we don't have to speak it. Now the thing is, this is absolutely 100% true. So then the question is, for me, if I don't have to speak the Irish language, then why do I bother? Well, for me, I look at the Irish language the same way I look at the Irish rugby team. So I don't have to support the Irish rugby team, and I don't get any financial benefit from doing it. And if I was purely interested in rugby from a sporting point of view, I'd be better off supporting New Zealand, because they're better than Ireland, and then I'd get to celebrate winning the World Cup every few years. But I don't do that. I still support Ireland, because I'm Irish, and because they're a part of my identity as an Irish person. And that's the same way that I view the Irish language. So I'd like to thank you all for your time this evening, and Gura Míle Maith Agaibh.